So I've just moved house and right now I don't have a proper gaming setup. This might look like my old gaming setup from before I moved, but this is actually my editing PC which has 0 games installed. All I have in here currently is my PS5 Pro. And I've had so many delays that I don't know when I'll have my gaming setup ready to go yet. So right now would be the perfect time for me to try out something like this, right? Let's do this. So MSI have sent over their latest generation handheld, the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus A2 VM. We all remember the launch of the original Claw A1M last year, which didn't go very smoothly at all, as we know. I actually had the chance to review the Claw myself a few months after the initial release, when MSI and Intel had already made improvements to the device, and it showed me that there was definitely a lot of potential there for the future. So when MSI announced their next generation of the Claw, I was both intrigued and excited to try it out for myself. And today, I'm finally going to get the chance to do that. The device has had a major overhaul from the first one, so we're going to take a look at the new specs, test the performance, and see how it stacks up and compares to the original Claw. First things first, let's get this thing unboxed. I really like what they've done with the packaging on the Claw 8. I'm one of those people that tends to keep all of their tech boxes, and I really like it when a brand makes an effort to make it look good. But that's not what you're interested in, you want to see what's inside. Opening this up then, the first thing we have is the Claw itself, which we'll come on to shortly. Then underneath that we have a 65-watt charging plug with a USB-C connector. Then of course we have the manuals and information, which 99% of people are just going to ignore. So now let's take a look at the device itself, and the first thing that you'll notice is the interesting colour they went with. Whereas most devices these days come in either white or black like we saw with the Claw A1M, this time MSI have decided to go with a combination of black with this new colour that they're calling Sandstorm. I remember when I first saw pictures of this and I was a bit taken aback and skeptical of the choice, but seeing it in person, it actually looks much nicer than I thought. I recently had the chance to visit MSI's office in London for a chat about some of their upcoming 2025 devices, and according to them, the colour choice was made to give this device more of a retro vibe, and I have to say, they've done a good job with it. You may notice that this device looks bigger than the old Claw, and you'd be right to think that with it measuring a larger 299 by 126 by 24mm in size. And it's also heavier, weighing 795 grams over the 675 gram original. Looking at the top, we can see some more changes with completely redesigned and reprofiled bumpers and triggers. And these instantly feel a lot more comfortable and natural to use than the old ones. There's also been a subtle redesign of the cooling vents on top of the device too. Moving on to the back, and we're seeing a complete redesign, starting with the grips, which are much more rounded and again feel more natural to hold, which is a nice touch. The rear buttons have also been reprofiled into a nicer shape as well. And finally, the cooling vents have had this complete overhaul, and the back plate has this nice rib texture which gives it a much cleaner look overall in my opinion. Overall, I think they've done a very good job with the design changes this time round. Ergonomically, as mentioned, we have many changes to the shape of the grips, bumpers, triggers, etc. And the Claw 8 is definitely more comfortable to hold, which is impressive given that I thought the old Claw was comfortable to use as well. The new grips sit in the hands very nicely, and the reshaped triggers especially felt great, and for me are one of the best changes to the design they've made. The Claw 8 does weigh 120 grams more than the A1M, but honestly, I haven't really noticed any difference when holding each device. And the larger size of the chassis makes no difference in terms of use either, with all the buttons still being located in places that are easy to reach and very comfortable. It's definitely all a step in the right direction. In terms of connectivity and I/O, on the top we now have two USB-C Thunderbolt 4 DisplayPort and power delivery ports, an SD card reader, and a 3.5mm jack for microphone in and headphone out. But now let's talk about the big one, the specs. The Claw A1M was the first handheld device to run on Intel's mobile processors, which definitely contributed to the rocky launch and had some people questioning if they'd stick with it. Well, they not only did that, but they went a step further. The Claw 8 packs an Intel Core Ultra 7 258V processor, which is a big step up from the Core Ultra 7 155H we saw in the Claw A1M. It also packs improved Intel Arc 140V graphics too, which should help push that gaming performance further. Intel made a lot of improvements over time with the performance, so I'm excited to see how the new hardware performs. The Claw 8 also has double the RAM capacity with 32 gigs of faster LPDDR5 8533 over the 16 gigs of LPDDR5 6400 before. For storage, we have a 1TB NVMe PCIe Gen 4 SSD with a slot for an additional M.2 2230 SSD as well. So on paper, this Claw 8 AI Plus is packing some pretty impressive upgrades over the original, original, so we'll see how that affects the performance shortly. Screen-wise, the Claw 8 gets its name from the fact it has a new larger 8-inch screen which also contributes to the larger device. It's still full HD with a 1920 by 1200 resolution due to the fact that the new screen is now 16 by 10 instead of 16 by 9. It's still 120Hz with an IPS display and of course it's touchscreen. The larger screen on the same resolution means it has a slightly lower pixel density than its predecessor, but it's not noticeable at all. The screen itself looks great, it's nice and bright with good colour coverage and accuracy, and as I've said with other devices, I would like to see an OLED version in the future for sure, but the screen on his still looks great nonetheless. So now is the reason most of you are here. How does the device actually perform in games? We've seen that this device has a ton of hardware upgrades over the old Claw with a more powerful processor, better GPU, better RAM, all things that should boost gaming performance nicely. To put that to the test, I've downloaded a bunch of games to see how each performed, including some of those I tested on the Claw A1M to compare. And for the sake of fairness, all of these games are running on medium graphics settings throughout and Intel Xe super sampling set to performance. First up is Cyberpunk 2077, which on the original Claw was averaging around the mid-30s and is now getting a much better FPS around the mid-50s with the same settings, which is an impressive improvement. In Forza Horizon 5, previously the old Claw was getting around the high 50s, but as you can see, the Claw 8 is getting a much smoother 90 FPS and the difference is very noticeable. Next up is Starfield, and this one really struggled on the A1M, getting around the mid-20s. Again, we are seeing an improvement, fairly modest, but it's now up to around the mid to high 30s. The last game directly comparing performance is Minecraft, which was getting around the mid 40s on the old device. As you can see, it's now getting around 60 to 100 depending on what you're looking at. Next up, I tried out some Horizon Forbidden West to see how it holds up, and this was getting anywhere between mid 30s to low 50s depending on the gameplay and location. I've been playing a lot of Assetto Corsa Competizione recently, so I thought I'd test it out, and we were getting a pretty consistent low 70s, which wasn't enough to help me stay on the track. I also wanted to try out a few newer games on the Claw 8 to see how they hold up on here as well. First up is Avowed, which bizarrely for a 2025 game does not support Intel XeSS, and on medium settings it was getting a more modest total in the high 20s. Next up is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and that was getting around 40 to 45 FPS. And then finally we can wrap things up with the brand new Atomfall, which released today and was getting around 55 to 70 FPS. So overall then, we can see that there is definitely a good step forward in performance over the original Claw, as you'd expect. For the most part, games are nice and smooth and visibly look much better than they did before. Of course, performance varies depending on which settings you're using, and you would be able to stretch the FPS further if you wanted to turn the settings down, or vice versa, you can turn them up to get better looking games, but they may run quite slow. As with the previous Claw, this being a Windows device, you have plenty of game options and you can play all of the libraries you would on a regular PC. You can install things like Steam, Epic Games, Xbox and more to give you access to all of your game libraries, and you can download these locally to your M.2 storage. The vast majority of these games work natively with the gamepad controls. You shouldn't need to change any settings, but you may sometimes need to switch from desktop mode to gamepad mode, which can quickly and easily be done in the software. Speaking of which, the MSI Center M software gives quick and easy access to both the launchers and your entire game library too, making it nice and simple for you to launch your favorite games. And it's also a hub for controlling all of the settings on your device more simply. Whether you want to switch user scenarios, change control modes, set up network connections, or dive deeper into other settings like Mystic Light RGB and noise cancellation, all of this is quickly and easily accessible within MSI Center M, which can be opened anytime using the bottom button on the left hand side of the screen. Or if you want to change things even faster whilst in the middle of the game maybe, you can press the bottom button to the right of the screen and this will open up the quick settings page. This has everything from brightness control, volume levels, control mode, keyboard and power settings, most of which can be easily adjusted with a single press. The layout is really simple and intuitive, and my only gripe with it is that sometimes it can be a little slow and unresponsive when trying to navigate, but for the most part it works well. Now, as with any handheld, battery life is very important, and this is another area that MSI have focused on with the new Claw. The Claw 8 features a new larger 80 watt-hour battery, an improvement on the 53 watt-hour battery in the previous version. And from my testing, this has definitely helped to extend the battery life much further. During the gaming testing, I sat and played multiple games back to back, opening and closing apps, trialing different power modes and settings, and the battery lasted out very nicely. I was able to get around 3 3 hours of game time before getting a low battery message, which is much better than my last Claw test where I believe I got around 90 minutes. So if you're planning to use this for, say, gaming on a long car journey or a train journey, you will likely be able to get most, if not all the way, without having to charge the device, which is very handy. You can also extend battery life by changing power modes in user scenario between 8 watts, 17 watts and 30 watts. Just remember, this will also affect the performance of the device too. And speaking of user scenario, this is just one of the ways in which you can customize the experience with the Claw when it comes to performance and longevity. In manual mode, you're able to switch between those different power modes as mentioned, and you can also change the fan speed modes as well, adjusting the level of cooling and again in turn performance of the device. You can also switch to endurance mode, which automatically limits certain settings with the sole aim of extending the battery life further. Or you can let the device do all of this for you automatically depending on what you're using the device for by switching to AI engine. This mode uses AI to determine what you're doing on the device, whether it's intensive gaming, watching media or browsing, and it will automatically change the settings to the best fit. This is the mode I was using for the gaming performance testing to put it through its paces, and for the most part it did a good job. But if you want to get the ultimate gaming performance out of the device, then it's probably best to tune those settings manually. So on to the main question then, is this device worth you spending your money on? Well, contrary to what a lot of people thought, I actually liked the previous Claw after they'd made a lot of improvements from the launch. And I have to say, the new Claw has taken all of the flaws that the A1M had and either reduced or removed them entirely. The performance issues that were seen on the original Claw are all but gone, with much better FPS figures in the games that I tested, and the gameplay was nice and smooth and very fun to play on this device. The bigger screen is something that I like a lot because, well, why wouldn't you want a bigger screen, right? Yes, I'd have liked it to be OLED, and maybe on the next version it might be, and maybe it's a little less portable than it was before, but that doesn't really bother me. The design changes have made the device much easier and more comfortable to use than it already was, and I like the unique color choice compared to the all black and white devices on the market. This particular version of the Claw comes in at £899, so it's pricey for sure, but from the performance and improvements I've seen, I'd definitely be happy to part with that money to get one. But of course, I want to know what you think too, so let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the new Claw, and don't forget to drop a like if you enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more tech reviews, setup builds and more. I'll catch you all very soon in the next video. See you later.